Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, a show for people who are obsessed with all things marketing. I'm your host, Veronica, Romney, certified master marketer, international keynote speaker, workshop facilitator, and the author of a new book called Identity Marketing. Each week, I interview rainmakers from brands big and small to pull back the curtain on what's actually working in marketing today. We dig into real-life wins and losses and their very real consequences, and get into spicy discussions of marketing controversies and opposing philosophies. This is the real marketing thought leadership you've been looking for in your ears on demand. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. You know this next guest. If you're listening to the Rainmaker Podcast for marketers who care about marketing, you know this name. He has written 22 best-selling books, translated to 39 languages. He is an award-winning best-selling author, former VP of marketing at Yahoo, entrepreneur, business executive, marketing Hall of Famer, speaker, thought leader, daily blogger. The Seth Godin is on today's podcast with me, and I am literally beside myself. We just finished. We talked about, the topics are endless. I selfishly wanted to have a really meaningful conversation around identity, obviously in anticipation for my book, Identity Marketing, that's coming out, and to get his perspective, his unapologetic, unconventional perspective on all things marketing, branding, leadership, personal branding. He did that. We went there. And he's not scared to disagree and to challenge either my wisdom or conventional wisdom that is out there in the marketplace. What he was sharing about what he would do today if he was Seth Godin on day zero, both in regards to his business, his influence, his impact, his own personal brand. The answers have really just kind of rocked my core in the best way possible, because how many of us have been caught in the stream of more to count? And he just doesn't subscribe to that. And the alternatives that he gives you feel so tangible, so empowering and doable that, like, literally this episode, don't just listen to it once, listen to it twice, 3 times, and take notes. It's that monumental. So without further ado, I can't believe I'm even saying this. Please welcome my guest, Seth Godin.
Hi, V. How are you?
V is good. The fact that you even said V just literally just made my day. So thank you so much. First and foremost, I just need to thank Kathy Hiller, who put the two of us in this little riverside room together on this day. So thank you for coming, and thank you to her for putting us in connection with each other.
She's got a new book, and she's an all-star. So it's a pleasure. Anyone who's a friend of Kathy's is a friend of mine.
This is the dynamic that I have with her, because we're both originally from South Florida. I grew up in Boca Raton to Cuban immigrant parents. And so I just know my Boca family very well. And we had that in common. And so I kind of give her my sass. And she gave me her book in her generous self for free. And I reprimanded her. I'm like, don't give me your book for free. I should pay for your book on Amazon so that I'm prompted to leave a review. And that's the way to do this. So I actually have 2 of her books in my house, and she's a force, is what she is.
Indeed. So how's it going?
It's going really well, actually. I'm just, me personally, on the cusp of releasing my first ever marketing book in January. And so I'm personally going through an identity transformation as we speak.
I hear you. Everyone should write a book. The first one is different than all the others. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. In fact, in starting this podcast with you, I actually knew exactly what I wanted to ask you right out the bat, because let's talk about identity. You have been identified by your peers, the public, the business community as a whole, as an author, a .com business executive, an entrepreneur, the former Yahoo VP of direct marketing, award-winning, best-selling author, marketing Hall of Famer, speaker, thought leader, and daily blogger. And I understand that that's what we call you, and that's how we identify you with those labels. But who do you identify as? What label is the most authentic of who you are, one or many?
I'm a teacher and I'm a game designer.
Okay. Why those 2?
Teaching is what lights me up. When I am with someone who is transformed by me creating the conditions for them to learn what they want to learn, that's what I want to do again. And I started as a professional game designer when I was in my 20s. And I'm not talking about the kind of games you're thinking of, though that I have done many of those. I view systems as the fundamental unseen forces in our lives. And games are how we change systems. And marketing is largely a game where we bring something to the world. That's our move. And then the world does a response or not. That's their move. And then the moves go back and forth. And if you can see the game, then A, you won't take it too seriously. And B, you can separate your moves from yourself and understand how to make change happen. So when I'm doing one of those two things, I'm being a good version of myself. I am not great at things like copywriting or hustling or cold calling or all those things. Those are tactics. And sometimes you have to do things to bring the idea to the world, but that's not me.
So it's interesting to me that I would label you first and foremost a marketer. But you
that's just because I got to decide what marketing means.
Yes. And that's what you've done for the industry. You've literally defined marketing. I mean, the book, This is Marketing. And now we have This is You're yet again redefining what these big, broad, heavy terms really should mean for those of us in its discipline, for those of us who are practicing the art and science of marketing and whatnot. And when I was writing the introduction to my book, Identity Marketing, it forced me to self-reflect. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a this, I'm a that. I carry all of these labels that I've gained through my 37 years of life. But the one label that I have had now for almost 20 years that I haven't ever wrestled with is marketer. That's one, even though the way that I exercise marketing has had its versions and different eras, that one I've never wrestled with like I have some of my other ones, which has been really interesting that I still have this love and affection for this discipline after so many years and after how much it's changed for all of us. You are still as prolific as ever in this discipline. How have you stayed in the game this long with this much passion?
I think the most important thing I did was when I saw the cool kids getting in a bus that was going somewhere that I didn't want to go, I decided not to get on the bus. And I've repeatedly done that. That a group of people said marketing is hustle. A group of people said marketing is social media. A group of people said marketing has to be 140 characters. A group of people said you got to promise people they'll make $1 million while they're sleeping. And if I had gone along, my platform would have gotten so much bigger. And then I would have stopped because it, gives me a stomach ache. So instead I said, you know what? It's okay with me that I have far fewer blog readers than I used to. This is my blog. I'm going to write what I want to write because this is the work I want to do for the people who want me to do it. And if you don't get the joke, full respect. Thanks for stopping by, but this is not for you.
Yeah. Well, okay. This is interesting to me though, because, and this is what I told you right before we push, record, that if nobody listens to this conversation, I'm just thrilled to have it with you. Because that's really why I've used this podcast in the first place. To me, it's always been a relational tool to get to sit with giants or sit with people that I have such, profound respect for and get to ask my selfish questions. Which is one of the questions I have for you is, in all of the labels that I gave you that the world calls you in your Wikipedia page or in a Google search, you said, I am a teacher. Now, again, teacher by standard definition is what I just dropped my children off at elementary school to go experience, Miss Abramo and that's teachers. But you lovingly, affectionately refer to yourself as a teacher. So then when I think about marketing, because, right, how do we target people? How do we segment? How do we classify the buyer? It's by the labels that I started with, not the label that you just gave yourself. But really the truth of it is a label that you gave yourself. So how does marketing cross that bridge between what I identify you as, but how you truly identify.
Okay, so it's just us, so we can start going deep on this stuff. I would be delighted to, V. So here we go. Claude and I were talking the other day about subject lines. I had to deal with a bureaucracy, and I had to submit a PDF. And they said, you need to email it to this address. And I said, what should the subject line be? They said, you must leave the subject line blank. And this made me very uncomfortable. And my software program didn't even want to send it. It said, are you sure this subject line is blank? Subject lines are really fascinating. And I was thinking about who invented the subject line. So then Claude and I were talking about that, and he said, or she said, I don't know what gender Claude is. Claude said, the Sumerians with their clay tablets. And I said, really? Really? They put subject lines on them? And Claude said, no, I was hallucinating. Thanks for catching that. And so then I got to think about it. Clearly, books have subject lines on the cover. And many things that marketers do require a subject line, because we wouldn't have any clue about what to interact with if we had to read the whole thing or engage with the whole thing before we heard the subject line. A menu is nothing but a subject line for the food we're going to get. And so when you're talking about identity, and of course I haven't read your book yet, but you're talking about identity, it could be interpreted to mean a bunch of things. One thing it could be is ideas need handles. They need Dymo labels on them, so I know where to put them, what shelf they go on. And if you refuse to pick one, that's at your peril. That's like sending an email with a blank subject line. Now, some people can, right? If Barack Obama sent me an email with a blank subject line, I would read it because I could see who the sender was.
Sure.
So I've reached the point in my brand where I don't have to have a subject line if I don't want to. But most people in most situations, and me in many situations, have to have a subject line. So if you show up at the bank to make a withdrawal, don't wear a clown mask, because that's not going to work very well in terms of your subject line. And we have to be careful, though, because, for example, many people appropriately say, I don't like marketers. Well, no, you don't like people who do that thing you're calling marketing, but that's not what I call marketing. So if I show up at a cocktail party and someone says, what do you do? And I say, I'm a marketer. I've put a subject line on myself that isn't going to make the rest of our conversation go very well. So it's not serving them or me. And one of the challenges in a drive-by social media world is we are tricked into, by SEO and other things, into putting a convenient subject line on our identity that actually works against what we're trying to accomplish. So that was a little bit of a rant, but I don't know if that opens doors for you or not.
No, it's not a rant. Like you said, we're going deeper into this discussion because I do find that identity is a very complex subject, and it means different things for different people. And yet, when leveraged, can be, to me, one of the most undeniable powers on the planet. Because, let's take a modern example. Swifties literally saved the economy globally this past year. And I had this woman, her name is Olivia Levin, on the podcast. She's had this Instagram account called Swifties for Eternity since she was 13. She's now 24. This has been an 11-year commit. She was one of those really early diehard Taylor Swift fans, so much that Taylor personally invited her and her mother to come to one of her houses to listen to the Reputation album before anyone else got to listen to it.
Wow.
And this account now has, I think, amassed like 600,000 followers. So I had her on the podcast because one of the things that I noticed was everybody and their dog was going to one of the concerts because it was the thing to do, and FOMO, and you didn't want to be left out. But I would hear celebrities in interviews say like, yeah, I was there, but I'm not a Swiftie. And it's like, but you were decked out with like bracelets up your arm and like glitter and all of that. What do you mean you're not a Swiftie? You bought it. How much did you just spend on this experience? What do you mean you're not a Swiftie? And so I was asking her on the podcast, like, why do some people own it proudly while others are like, I can't, I don't deserve the right, or I feel like I can't use that label, that identity. And she was saying how, like, Swifties, that's earned. You are invested. You know the lyrics, the meaning behind the lyrics, the Easter eggs. Like it's deeper than just a Swiftie, or being what she would say the alternative is being a casual fan, which is more an appreciation of art, artists, multiple. And then I asked her, I'm like, the way that you talk about this identity of Swifties, it's almost like becomes separate to the origin of Taylor. And then, true or not true, she didn't even call you guys that first. The people called themselves Swifties. And then she just happened to randomly bless it in an interview by saying, yeah, I think my people call me Swifties.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at that identity play. It's clear revenue, economic impact. And I think, whoa, is this some untapped potential?
I didn't expect the last zag after those zigs. So, so where did this begin? It may be the Beatles, but probably before that, the Bobby Soxers. It certainly hit its pinnacle with the Grateful Dead. And in every one of those examples, it wasn't done with intent. And, Taylor is a brilliant business person. And so there was some intent there. But we have to be very careful when we think about organizing or feeding tribes of people, to think of them as ours, and to think of them that we can turn this community into an ATM, because it almost always causes it to fail.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, so the story of the Grateful Dead is totally worth understanding. They only had one top 40 hit in their entire career, and they just broke the record a few months ago for having the most Billboard hit albums long after they were wrapped up. That the Grateful Dead for 10 years was the number one grossing live act in America, even though they didn't have one hit record. And, you said everyone went to a Taylor Swift concert. Almost no one went to a Taylor Swift concert, actually. 0.01% of the population went to a Taylor Swift concert. That's enough. So the key to where the Dead thing begins is plenty of touring artists sold tickets, but they didn't sell tickets to the same person 10 or 20 times. And the choice of identity, and I loved your story about people saying, I'm not a Swiftie. What they were saying is Swiftiness is not how many records you've listened to, or how many you own, or even how many concerts you've been to. Swiftiness is a choice announcing your religion.
Yeah.
It is saying, I am choosing to display an identity to people. So I own 200 Dead recordings. I've been to see them a couple times. I've met a couple of the people, but I'm not a Deadhead. Because if I announce I'm a Deadhead, I'm demeaning people who are actually in the religion. I just like the Grateful Dead. And so when I meet someone like that, I can trade, Binghamton 70, whatever, stories with them, but I am doing it to respect them. I am not claiming to be a member of that group. And so it's not a comparison of passion or time spent or money. It's simply, do you need a label right now? Do you need an identity right now? And does choosing that identity get you what you want? And so what marketers do who are working with identity, I believe, who are doing it effectively, is they create the conditions for people who are seeking meaning to find it by getting souvenirs or tropes or scriptures that they have on offer. And just, again, I'm ranting, I'm sorry. But the last part, which might be distracting, is I'm amazed that this hasn't happened to AI yet, that no one has chosen to do that, because it's really practical and likely that will take off, but it hasn't.
It is interesting, because I know that we certainly we do the personification route of the machines. So hearing my 8-year-old and my 10-year-old scream at Alexa or scream, "Hey, Google, shut up." And it's like, be nicer, but why be nicer to what? So like it's a robot, it's a device, it's not a real human. The mayhems of the world, the flow from progressive, like, or the gecko, there is a personification of the intangible, the humanization of something that's not human. That is not the same thing as saying, I'm a Swiftie and broadcasting my faith.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
But both, I think, are things that both great, ethical, well-intended marketers do and use. And then sadly, with all things, opposition in all things, can also be exploited.
Yep.
And abused and manipulated. And this is where marketing gets its bad reputation, right? This is where we are guilty.
And marketing deserves its bad reputation in 20 areas. This is just one of them.
Fair. Fair. But it always makes me sad when I hear people say, "Oh, I hate marketing," because I'm like, "Oh, but really," and maybe this is how I've come to terms with it after so many years of doing it. To me, it's like marketing is the ethical persuasion of helping somebody make a decision that makes them get closer to the thing they already wanted, versus I've worked at organizations where this person didn't want to be a world-class speaker. Next thing they know, they've sat in a webinar, they want to be a world-class speaker, and they just spent 20 grand on credit card, to be a world-class speaker, which wasn't a desire that they had 45 minutes ago. And then that company didn't fulfill on its promise that they sold them in the first place. Where do you draw that ethical line after so many years working with so many practitioners too?
Okay, so there are two parts that I would answer. The first one is people, like Congress, people only hate marketing that doesn't work for them. They love marketing that does work for them. And so if you ask someone who says, "I hate marketers," you say, "Well, what's your favorite kind of clothing, or what's your favorite designer, or what's your favorite band?" Well, oh, that's not marketing. I just love that, right? And the second part is that manipulation, my definition, is when a marketer uses their power to get you to do something, but once you know what they know, you regret it. And marketers have a lot of power. And if you're creating circles of regret, then you're abusing that power.
I have so many thoughts right now because that's, and I know this isn't just unique to the online space, but man, the online industry had its reckoning in 2024. I've immersed myself in this tribe for the last couple of years, and I've worked behind some very big personal brands, and oof, was it a hard year. And I think it's because we've seen the deadline funnels, the fake, countdown timers. We've seen the overinflated bonuses. Like, who said this PDF was worth $80,000 and I'm getting it for 97? Like, what happened here? Like, who decided these artificial price points? And so all of these gimmicks and these things to try to give context, like, again, great marketing principles, give context to your price, blah, blah, blah. But like, just again, this manipulation, the urgency, the scarcity. I recently saw Gary Vee on stage, and he was like, fear was the emotional palette of 2024. Fear was it. It had its moment. And I think coupled with the stifling political atmosphere that all of us just were, had the net effect of, like, where do you go from here? If fear was the emotional palette and we are so done with this manipulation of urgency and scarcity and false kind of fear mongering, how do the good ones turn the tide?
It's not my job to preach to people, but I begin with, would I do this if I didn't get paid? And I think a lot of the kind of hustle marketers you're talking about have seduced themselves into thinking they're creating value, but there's no way they would do it if they weren't getting paid a lot. Number two, would they miss me if I were gone, if I didn't show up? And there are many people who have been indoctrinated to be hooked on squeeze pages, hooked on scams, hooked ever since snake oil was invented, right? That someone won't go to the doctor, but will go to a guy with a covered wagon and buy some oil because that's their practice. That doesn't mean you have to serve those people. I think that there are, I was at a climate conference last year, and there was the chief sustainability officer for one of the top 7 banks in America. And he was bragging about the fact that all their branches had LED lighting. I was like, yeah, really? Really? That's what you're bragging about? You funded $500 million worth of coal plants last year?
Yeah.
But we should applaud you for the LED lighting. How do you sleep at night? Well, he's like, someone has to do this job, and I got to feed my family. Yeah. No, there are lots of ways for someone with your privilege to feed your family. You don't have to do this job. And for somebody who has so many advantages to say, well, the system made me, make the system worse. That doesn't work for me. That's not how I was raised. And I am one of the few people who speak up about marketers doing this. I got kicked out of the Direct Marketing Association for several years because I testified on Capitol Hill about spam. And the Direct Marketing Association said, what are you doing? You're not on the right team. Oh. And I was like, it would be good for you if spam was against the law, because the people who are going to spam more than you have lower principles than you do. Right. It's a race to the bottom.
Right.
And a few years later, they called me up and they said, all right, you can come back. But we, as teachers, marketers, creators of change, we benefit when trust goes up. And there's always going to be somebody hustling, selling a NFT that they made yesterday, just so they can, quote, feed their family. But actually, that's not what they're doing. They're basically a grifter.
So what would your advice be, though, to the ethical ones, the moral ones, the ones that would answer that question, that if I didn't get paid, I'd still do what I'm doing today? Because they're losing the fight, or the perception is, and I'm not just, contesting the reality, that they feel that those who don't have the same level of integrity are winning the dollar, and the real ones who don't lower their standards to, compete in that manner, are not being able to stay in the game.
Yeah. So there are 2 ideas in this is strategy. Pick your customers, pick your future, pick your competition, pick your future. If you decide to pick customers who are low information choosers, who tend to put themselves in positions where they get scammed, and your competitors are also going after those people, don't be surprised that that's what the pressure you're under is, right? And, so when I built the Alt MBA, there was all this institutional pressure on me to make compromises that would have made it 10 times bigger than it was. And I said, I don't want to offer people a layaway plan to pay for it if they don't have the money. I don't want to offer people a promise that this is going to transform their career in 3 months. I said, those people, I don't want them to be students. Right. If they change their mind and see that there's a slow, steady, generous path to becoming who they want to become, they're welcome here. But if you're showing up saying, I'm standing on 1 foot, please tell me the secrets and I'll give you money, go down the street. I don't want to help you, because when you pick your customers, you pick your future.
This is wildly validating for my past, because the way that I was able to leave corporate was, my husband and I had a baby, and we're like, okay. And I moved back to Florida from Utah, and the business was based in Utah, and the CEO at the time was very anti-remote working. This was pre-COVID, obviously, right? And so they're like, well, we'll put you on a 90-day trial working remote. I'm like, you basically are not going to try to have me sue you, because I would sue you past my maternity leave. So right. They're like, we'll put you on trial. And we kind of read that as the writing on the wall. And so my husband, he's a natural salesperson. He literally is a VP of sales. So we're walking around, Meisner Park in Boca, and he's like, we should just do our own thing. And I'm literally just gave birth to this human. I'm like, what's happening in my life? But he's very persuasive. I'm like, yeah, we should do our own thing. My parents are Cuban immigrants. They started an air conditioning company with nothing. I could do this. Talk about privilege, right? And so we started an agency. And it was probably I've done different marketing business models. Having a marketing agency was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole freaking life.
Yeah.
And it was that. And I couldn't like articulate it at the time because I felt like I got most of my clients through ego. If I'm being really honest, I got most of my clients from speaking on stages. And when people see you speak on stage, they're like, oh my gosh, like you're so cool. Like I want to work with you. I'm like, thanks. It feels really good. And then you enter the relationship between agency and client. And all of a sudden, the dynamic, and it wasn't just me, like I wasn't just we had a full staff and everything. We had account manager and fulfillment, was the whole thing. But the dynamic, the relational dynamic immediately changed. And me and the team were now being treated like the crappy ex-boyfriend that had done them wrong.
Yeah.
And they were always pressuring us to like make amends for who burned them first and to do it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what is happening? Like we started this relationship with a completely different dynamic and now we're here. And after a couple of years, I just I like couldn't get out fast enough. And that happened summer 2019. But that was what you shared was really validating to like, that's why I left that specific business model. Because the buyer wasn't who I wanted to spend my days with if I wasn't with my kids, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's worth reminding people that you're not going to get tomorrow over again. And there are enormous numbers of ways for you to make a contribution, but maybe those ways don't have the scale you're hoping for.
Okay.
That's fine. It's fine. There's only 15,000 seats at Madison Square Garden. It doesn't do anybody any good to have 90,000 people want to come to the show. 15,000 people is enough. And so if you're going to work 2,000 hours next year, work for who? Contributing what? 99.99999% of people on the earth will never have heard of you. So don't tell me more is the point. It's not the point. Better is the point.
Okay, so I have a question because this is interesting coming from somebody who is as visible as you are.
I'm not that visible.
I would differ, sir.
No, let me just, I'm not, this is not false modesty.
Okay.
Right? That there are authors whose books sell 100 to 1,000 times as many copies as mine.
Sure.
There are websites that get 1,000 times as much traffic as mine. So I'm visible to people who are paying attention to a very small circle of people. Fair. That's my goal. Famous to the family, invisible to everybody else.
Wait, that was amazing. Famous to the family, invisible to everybody else. So then, is then your counsel to be more protective, but also selective of who you designate as family?
Yeah, exactly. Pick your customers. Pick your circle. Pick the, so if they make a list of TED speakers, I'd like to be on it. But if they make a list of people at Davos, I'm fine that I'm not on it, right? Those are totally different families. And when you decide which circle you want to be part of, it's totally different than falling in love with the false proxy of bragging about whatever it is, number of customers or sales this year. Yeah. What I have learned, I've been doing this now for a very long time, is that whoever is really, really hot, a couple years later, I don't know where they went. And I just decided, 9,500 blog posts ago that I was going to do this. And a lot of my peers don't do this anymore.
Yeah.
But I wanted to build a practice where I could sharpen my blade on my spoke shave and do this carving and make it for people who wanted it.
I was going to ask you that, like for those of us, I mean, because this is marketing, this is strategy. I want your book this is personal branding because
that was the first one, but it's not called that, and I can tell you about it later. But go ahead, ask your question.
Well, yeah, because I agree with you. I agree with you that, and I've heard a lot of people that have amassed a certain amount of volume and exposure and high visibility, and they'll say things to me like, if I were to start the game over today, I would never be famous like I am right now. Like I was lucky that I hit it right when YouTube was taking off or when this was taking off, and those moments, those cataclysmic waves, no longer exist. And so people are like, they are deflated. Like, why even try to stand out? And so I guess for me, it's like, for those desirous of having intentional and meaningful brands, personal brands moving forward, what would you do if you were Seth Godin day zero again, right? Like, what would you do differently or same?
Yeah. So a little bit of context and then I'll answer the question. So Jay Levinson, who people don't know as well as they did back then, invented the term guerrilla marketing. I helped Jay go from having a couple books to having a lot of books. I wrote 3 of them with him. And the last one we did together was called Guerrilla Marketing Yourself. And it was the first book on personal branding. It came out right when Tom Peters wrote the Fast Company cover story with Alan Weber on the brand called You. My take on it is a little bit more nuanced than many people's. So here we go. A brand is not a logo, and a brand is not a social media presence.
Right.
The people who say they're your followers aren't following you. The people who say they're friends aren't your friends. This is just a weird proxy for momentary attention. What a brand is the benefit of the doubt and the promise. It's what do we expect from you when you walk into the room? And so, if a professional wrestler walks into a lunch meeting, you have a hint as to how they're going to behave. And if they don't, you're surprised because their personal brand is a certain kind of interaction.
Sure.
Arnold Schwarzenegger has a personal brand, whether or not you follow him online. So that's the first principle that almost everybody misses. Personal brand is not, how do I put on a show on social media to create controversy to get momentary attention? It's, what do I stand for?
Right.
And it is possible to have no brand whatsoever, but whether you're doing it with intent or not, if you make noise, you are establishing whether or not you earn the benefit of the doubt from people. And you are establishing what promise you are making by making this noise. And the myth is that you can be a jerk for a while, then get famous, and then use it to do the work you've always wanted to do. I don't have any anecdotes of people who have actually succeeded at doing that. And so back to this idea of the smallest viable audience. You don't need more than a couple 100,000 people to have any idea who you are to make a fine living if you are offering a lot of value to people who have money to spend for the value you are creating.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what I find the most uncomfortable part about being a personal brand? Is the, pardon my French, the self-prostitution element. Because I hear what you're saying. And like, if no one listened to this podcast, I would be beside myself, right? Like, this is just, I'm just having the best time. It's a date. I'm having a great time, right? But then there's the element of like, gosh, but there were so many things that you said, and there were so many elements of this conversation I think would be so beneficial for Danielle Connor and for Marie Zarnecki. And I start thinking about these individuals that I would like to share this value with. And so, okay, well, then I have these incredible free accessible platforms I can do so. And so then there comes the self-prostitution element. Well, it's like, oh, okay, well, like which angle and which cut and this and that. And then it takes away.
Wait, I was with you until you started talking about production values. What's wrong with you making the production of this better? Isn't that a craft that's worth doing?
It is a craft, but I think where I struggle is being present in the moment and then also self-producing the star.
Okay, that part is that's not prostitution, right? Right? Because you're I don't want to take the analogy too far, but there are no pimps in this conversation, right? I think what you're describing is an internal conflict of being the star of the show and the director as well.
Yes.
And there's no moral problem there. It's just hard to have your brain do both things at the same time.
Sure.
The moral problem is the false siren of authenticity. And I don't know who started talking about it, but Kathy and I argue about this all the time. I've persuaded her that this meme that the best way to build a personal brand is to be authentic is nonsense. Because authenticity is for your friends. Consistency is for professionals. That brands that are inconsistent disappear. Patagonia is consistent.
Yeah.
Apple is mostly consistent. If Apple came out with a low budget line of golf clubs, people would be very confused. They could make a lot of money for a while from that, but it would be inconsistent. But to be authentic, okay, so I boot up my Mac and it crashes. Why did it crash? Because Tim Cook is having a bad day today. He's being authentic. He's authentically grouchy, so my Mac doesn't work. That's not okay. So this idea that you have to bare your soul, become intimate with people who you don't know and never will, so that you can, quote, build your personal brand, that is how you burn out. Okay. That is how you feel like a prostitute, because you are pretending something or not. I mean, all of it. No. When I do my work, you may have noticed if you look at my other videos, I'm wearing the same uniform every time. Because when I put this on, I am being Seth Godin. This is the consistent version of me. I am not here to be the friend of the person who's viewing this. I'm a teacher. I'm wearing my uniform. I'm doing my craft. And if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. That just means you didn't like my craft. It doesn't mean you didn't like me. You don't know me.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, you just shifted my own paradigm. So I'm like literally having a moment in reflection. So thank you for the call out. I do appreciate it. Because I will not name names, of course, but like I remember even having a moment at my kitchen table a couple of years ago where I was working with somebody who I didn't think was what they were broadcasting to be. Publicly, they stood for empowerment of underrepresented women, but then behind the scenes, they were disempowering their female staff. Like, well, that's a conflict. And yet I was in a pretty prominent leadership position, helping them build the systems, the people, the culture, all this vehicle beneath the vision and mission. And I had a moment at my kitchen table. My husband came home from the gym and I'm like tears, he's like, what is happening? I'm like, I'm making the golden calf that the people are worshiping. Like, I felt like I was being responsible in some ways of creating the false idols that the people were worshiping, not knowing what was really real, right? And so I exited immediately shortly after that moment at the kitchen table because my integrity, regardless of how much I was getting paid, which was a lot, I just can't do it, right?
So integrity is something that is in and of itself.
Yeah.
Internally consistent.
Yeah.
And every human I've ever met is a hypocrite. And hypocrites are actually really useful because at least they have high standards. At least they are talking about things being better. And the disconnect here for me is that person you were talking to was being inconsistent. And the question is, how do we help people who are making promises be consistent with integrity in and of itself? Because when they do that, they end up doing more of what they said they wanted to do in the first place. So, when Apple puts someone deep into credit card debt to get this artifact that becomes part of their religion, the free market's not free and choices are made. I think Apple is at some level on the hook for that, impoverishing large numbers of people to buy a luxury good they can't afford. We got to be aware that the promises we're making have consequences. And so working on the Carbon Almanac, we were all aware of how hypocritical we all were. That's okay, as long as it starts a cycle toward better. It's not okay when you do it to manipulate people.
But that's assuming that you guys have the intentions to fulfill the ultimate promise from the beginning.
Right. The intention is that's what I'm trying to get at, is that if you can create a cycle toward better, right? Like this person you're talking to, I'm guessing wasn't hitting people with a stick, but so there's already a baseline. If this catches on, the baseline's probably going to go up. So the interesting work is self-marketing. How do I, Seth Godin often when I'm hit a plateau, I will listen to an audiobook that I recorded 5 years ago to remind me of what the dreams of that person were in my own voice, so I can be a better version consistently of who I said I want to be. And so I'm not criticizing you for walking away. Walking away is almost always the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying we can't hold ourselves to the standard of every single action that every marketer takes must be 100% matching what they are hoping for. Because if so, we would never get anywhere. But that's not the same as manipulating people so that they are harmed by the promises that you made.
I think the hard part was who decides if it's manipulative or not.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And I think that was where it was difficult, because in the conversations we would have internally, where I would try to bring forth or attempt to draw attention to the inconsistencies that you're describing, those weren't well received.
Yep.
And I think we talked about power dynamic a little bit earlier, and I know that you have quite a bit of work, and both published and on your blog, when it comes to leadership and culture. That's one thing that I think has been really challenging for my peoples, like being a marketer, being a leader within an organization. There is a power dynamic that you're not at the tippity top.
Right.
And you have to market yourself, and you have to market your ideas both up, down, side to side. And so, it can be often very deflating when.
Oh, yeah. Because the good news is you're not in charge, and the bad news is you're not in charge.
Right.
But you have a position where you can create the conditions for the system to begin to change. Mm-hmm. And so what does that mean? It means which proxies are showing up on the CEO's desk? What is the team measuring?
Right.
If you think about how does a challenger brand in, say, fast food change the culture of all its frontline workers who are undertrained and underpaid and underappreciated, right? How do you do that if all you're doing is making the commercials? Well, that's hard unless the commercials are all about the cycles of feedback that are going to occur inside the facility. Mm-hmm. And, so when Burger King started going after McDonald's in the 70s and the 80s, this whole idea that you can have it your way meant that the operations people had to keep that promise. Otherwise, right? And so we think as marketers that maybe our only job is to look backwards and to put on a song and dance about what we did yesterday. But what we're actually doing is systems work to create the foundations so that the organization changes and they think it was their idea to change.
Well, there's some of my favorite stories that you have in your books, by the way, that highlighting that were like, especially in the era, I feel like, of where the chief marketing officer is the least tenured chief of the chiefs, where CMOs are, I can't tell you how many articles I've read, like CMOs are the dying chief, but now chief revenue officers are the hot and sexy ones. I'm like, well, no, essentially the same thing. So, so it is interesting that you're bringing this up, because marketing literally can change not just organizations, but, to your point, culture as we know it and how we see it.
Yeah.
And yet it's often the most bullied chief sometimes.
Well, but so I believe it's the CMOs systemically, not any individual, but systemically it's the CMO's fault. And here's the reason.
Tell me.
The promise that is made to the CEO when they decide to spend the money for a CMO is, go ahead and spend this money and everything's going to get better. We're not going to explain to you what marketing is, and we're not going to explain to you what the leverage is, but just go ahead and spend the money. And it takes 6 months for the happiness to fade, 6 months to realize that this isn't working, and then 6 months to find a new one. That's why it's 18 months, because you made a promise you couldn't keep. And the reason you couldn't keep it is you didn't have the leverage. That you went to meetings about the logo and you called it rebranding. And you went to plenty of other meetings where you didn't have a say, as opposed to saying, what we're going to do as marketers is change the way the company deals with the market. If anyone in this place deals with the market, they work for me.
Not to put you on the spot, have you seen what's been happening with Jaguar?
Oh, my Jaguar blog post 2 weeks ago is one of my best blog posts of the year, because I was just completely unleashed completely. It was so. The reason I wrote it is because I think a lot of commentators miss the point.
Okay.
Here's the point is pretty simple.
Tell me. Yeah.
First one is relogoing and rebranding are not the same thing. But the second one is this. It's easier than ever to make a car. It's always been hard, but it's easier than ever. What is the hard part? The hard part is earning the benefit of the doubt and the trust to get someone to put up the money to buy a new car, one that they don't haven't experienced before. Yeah. So if you take over this company, if you're Tata, you take over this company, and they have 100 years of magic heritage, and good news for you, almost no cars on the road, right? So it's a perfect combination of benefit of the doubt without a lot of hypocrisy opportunity because you don't have to worry about the existing cars. Why would you stop using that and then come out with cars that anyone could have made with a ruler and a protractor, as opposed to saying, you know what we stand for? We stand for elegance and beauty.
Yes.
Let's make the most elegant, beautiful electric car in history. Yes. Charge appropriately.
Yep.
And why would you throw out a logo that's worth $1 billion? It doesn't make any sense.
I personally drive an XC90 Volvo, and I've been driving Volvo since I had the boys.
Because they're, quote, safer.
Yeah, 100%.
Positioning.
100%. That's exactly why I got it, because I wanted the sexy mom car. I didn't want a minivan. No. I didn't want to be a minivan mom. Talk about identity. But I also wanted to be a great mom and a good mom and a safe mom. So I'm like, okay, like I can't just have this like 2-door thing. I got to get a car that's like with the kids and the side airbags. And so I did all the research, and the best middle ground vehicle that still like made me feel like the woman I wanted to feel like, but also be a great mother was the Volvo. And so seeing the Volvo commercial where people are crying, and then contrast with just Jaguar just did. I was like, oh my gosh. It's just wild. It's wild. I'd like to be a fly in the room. Like who, what? And this wasn't like a month in the making. This was like, did nobody at one point go, this is a bad idea? Like, or is it just some cost fallacy? Well, I've already been in a relationship with this jerk for 14 years. Might as well contribute another 14 years. Like, at what point, right? And then there's the the intern in the corner, the actual Gen Z interns. Like, this is not going to go well.
So. One of my very, very first mentors was a teacher I had in college. And when I went to get my first job, I called him up and I asked for advice. And he said, you say you're looking for a company that's marketing driven. I said, yeah. He said, don't you mean market driven? And I've never forgotten the distinction. Marketing driven means decisions are made by the marketing department. And market driven means decisions are made with the market in mind. Mm-hmm. And the brilliance of Volvo's positioning, and also Marlboro cigarettes positioning, which Jay Levinson actually worked on. In both cases, they took a product that could have been positioned in 7 different ways, and they just picked one.
Yeah.
And Marlboro cigarettes used to be an effect, however you say that word, women's brand for Park Avenue women. And in just one day, they just changed it. They said, no, we're this. That's a position. And Volvo was, just like Saab, except we're the safe one. And then they had to build a system that would make it true.
Yeah.
And the mistake they made at Jaguar is they didn't pick a position. They just made a car.
Yeah, this will be a lesson for a long time.
And maybe they'll prove us wrong and sell 1 million of them, but I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. Okay, I have a question for the future, because easily you're just someone you could just spend hours with. But as we walk into a brand new, literally we're on the cusp of a brand new year with everything that's just transpired. And I think I'm actually very, it's taken me aback that you listened to the you 5 years ago. And so I'm like, who do you hope to be 5 years from now when that version is listening to our conversation today or reflecting back at the body of work and the content you're putting out today? Like, what are you excited about for your future? I want to ask you both professionally, but also personally, like, what are you excited about?
So I am bereft and afraid about a lot of things.
Okay.
Like media amplified division that's based on nothing, like the short end of the stick that's going to be offered to so many people who don't deserve it, and the shifts in climate. Those three things I spend most of my time thinking about. I am excited, really excited about AI and the possibility of getting back to human connection. So half an hour ago, you asked, what would Seth do if he was starting from zero? And it wouldn't be to try to get a bigger megaphone. It would be, can you find 30 people who, if you connected them to one another, would be delighted and would want someone else to join in? That circle of 100 or 1,000, could you build a resilient, generative, dignity-filled circle of people who have money to spend to achieve their goals of 1,000 people? Because if you could do that, you would never need to look for work again for the rest of your life. And this was impossible 30 years ago. And now it's imperative because we didn't solve the loneliness problem. We made it worse.
Yeah.
And what we did was we put on this show where people pretend that they're happy and successful, making everyone else feel worse. And where the proxy that benefits a social media company of numbers, which can be amplified by division, is the only proxy that too many people are paying attention to. This cannot stand. It will not stand. So what's going to replace it? Well, we're seeing a different generation of people coming along saying, you screwed up so many things. No, we don't want to sign up for that. We don't remember MASH and mass market TV. And we don't remember when everyone on earth was watching the same thing on television. We have a new thing happening now. So we need these local, not geography, but community leaders who are going to establish what's next. And I don't think I'm going to be one of those people, but I'm thrilled that it's happening. And I'm rooting for it to happen.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I felt like when I started my agency, I just wanted to make a difference in Boca. I just remember I entrenched myself in like Chamber of Commerce. I was on the board of directors for the BBB. I was in BNI. did work with SCORE. Like I just immersed myself in this little pocket in Boca, right? And I taught at FAU and like just different things like that. And then when we moved to North Carolina right before so we moved to North Carolina Halloween 2019, and the world literally shut down, right? March 2020. And so everybody's forced to do virtual. And I psychologically, even in my mental health, I could just tell that, like, talk about loneliness. I felt like I was, in my office became like the padded cell, like, oh my gosh, like, who am I even talking to when I like talk to my camera right now? This is so uncomfortable. And in this last year, I'm not getting paid. I'm like I'm like, I need this, damn it. It's for me. Like, let's start with, like, I'll be selfish. I need connection with women who are ambitious and driven, but also have really strong core family values. And like, I just need to find my people, it was a desire. And so I slowly started finding these like entrepreneurs, whether online or offline, in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just have dinner once a month. And that started the beginning of the year. And it was a group this big. And now it's like, I'm not getting paid. I'm like the little mother hen of this little
you are
group
getting
of
paid.
chicks.
You're just not getting paid in money.
Right. Exactly. And I wonder, it's funny because before there was ever the internet, like I think about my parents who've had an air conditioning company for 33 years before they ever sold it, like true definition of the American dream. And it was all local. I mean, they took care of me, my brother, and my sister for over 30 years, being Carlos and Sophia in Boca, know? And so I wonder if in 2025, it's like a little bit of a renaissance of like the fundamentals of good business.
I hope so. But I think we're going to redefine local. I have a local circle. One person's in Australia, one person I was just engaging with in Toronto, but we're local because I don't leave this room very often. So it doesn't matter how many zip codes away you are. That's the kind of local that is the transformative one right now. And so that's why if we hadn't invented all this transcontinental stuff and you had your 500 people in Boca or in North Carolina, you wouldn't be looking for the next 500. 500 would be enough.
Right.
We only feel like 500 isn't enough because we're comparing ourselves to a Kardashian. And so, as we wrap up this conversation, which is the highlight of my day, I want to reflect back that you are doing something really important in the thoughtfulness you're bringing to what you're doing, in your resistance to hustle, in the way that your book is going to help people see what's possible. So I'm really grateful to know you.
Oh, well, we do this thing to officially sign us off, because I've asked you all of my questions that I've wanted to ask you, and I think it's only fair when the guest gets to do it back. So I'll leave the last question of our conversation for you to ask me whatever you want, which should be fun.
How old are your kids?
I call them man cubs. So they're 8 and 10 boys.
Okay. So what's the billboard on the side of the road that you want them to read when you're driving them in your Volvo today? What does it say?
This is a good one. And I don't know if it's because my son is in 5th grade, about like on the cusp of going into dreaded middle school. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of the worst. Body-wise, social acceptance,
we should have middle school abroad for sure.
Yeah. It's just kind of the worst. And then I have this 2nd grader who's still like just blissful, living his best life. So I have these 2 boys who are not that far apart in age, but just because of the way the school year lined up, it feels like cataclysmic that they're like really far apart in where they are socially and what matters most. And so when you asked me that question, I immediately thought of my oldest, because he's like really in this developmental age where other people's opinions matter so much.
Yeah.
More than what mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, really abuela thinks, Yeah. And so I think for me, because we were literally just talking about this last night, it's like, it doesn't matter what other people say or think. Sometimes I call them dirty penny thoughts. I'm like, you don't want to pick up a dirty penny. Why do you want to carry this dirty penny around all day? What this kid said, right? But if I can get him to understand that the only opinion that matters is his opinion of himself.
Beautiful.
Then I've won the parent. This makes me emotional. Like, then hopefully I win the parenting game, because like I want to be successful in business. I want to have a successful marriage. But I will never, I never would want to screw up my kids. Like that's the stakes of stakes.
Yeah.
And that's a game that you don't know if you actually win.
Ever.
Ever. And so you're just doing the best you can day to day with the circumstances as they are. But if I can have my kids if they can be downloaded with some core values and principles like that
Beautiful.
one, then I'll take it. All right, my dear friend, my new friend, Seth, thank you so much for being on today's Rainmaker podcast.
Thank you, V. A privilege and a pleasure.
Thanks for listening today. If you've loved what you heard, make sure to rate the show, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps us get the Rainmaker podcast in front of more passionate marketers just like you. And if you're ready to transform your marketing from buy this to be this, pick up my new identity marketing book available on my website at veronicaromney.com. Until next time, my friends, keep making it rain.